All right. So, hi. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I interned for 10 weeks at the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and specified under the Eviction Helpline. So, the Virginia Poverty Law Center was founded in 1978 as a not-for-profit. They advocate for a number of different things, but economic justice is what I was under. Under the Virginia Poverty Law Center, so through them, they've created a campaign to reduce evictions. Um, Post Matthew Desmond's publishing of Evicted back in a few years ago, they created this idea of the campaign to reduce evictions from various groups across the state of Virginia um, to advocate evictions that are now um, that are now known as a promising issue that we have in our United States. So, from the campaign to reduce evictions, they made a subcategory called the Eviction Helpline that was recently created in June of this year, this summer, which I was excited to be a part of its new founding. Um, and you can do 1833 no evict if you are facing eviction or if you know someone that's facing eviction, and they'll direct you directly to the helpline. So now going into my role and what I did during my internship was this is kind of a broad picture of what I did as far as the intake. So what I would do is daily I would check the inbox daily. We get voicemails emailed directly to our email, the CMS email box. So I would check that, see, and we divided it into three subcategories. The first one was normal eviction. So we have standard and then we have urgent eviction. So most of them would go into the standard evictions, but depending on whether the voicemail recognized it as an urgent eviction, it would go into the urgent, and I would work from the urgent down to the standard. And we also had a Spanish hotline that I helped with some, but my mentor or my supervisor, Phil Story, he primarily did the Spanish intakes. So I took control of the intakes that we had from Virginia. And so I would listen to the voicemails of these clients and make a profile for them. And then after making the profile for them, I would reach out to them. And typically, when you reach out to clients, you have three unsuccessful call attempts, which I will later go into detail as one of my weaknesses that I had. We tried to limit ourselves to calling them only 3 times. And when I was able to make successful calls, I would add any information that would assist to their case, such as legal documents, their lease form, their details about the situation, any statements that they made about themselves or about from their landlord. And then after all that is complete, oftentimes these phone calls weren't short. Roughly, they would take 20 to 30 minutes, but I've taken some calls that were a little over an hour. And that's, again, another weakness that I had in my internship, so I will go further into that later. But after I gather all the information needed to create their case, I would complete the intake and then further prep the client's profile for the attorney callback. So basically, my job was to gather all the information needed for the attorney to assess what to do from there. So these are the eviction rates nationwide. You can see that 5 of the large cities in the United States, 5 of these cities reside in Virginia. Richmond is ranked number 2 at 11.44% daily eviction rates. And 3 out of the 5 mid-sized cities in the United States are also in Virginia. So the next thing is, how did we get here? So we got here because of a number of different reasons. One of them was Roosevelt's Homeowners Loan Corporation that was enacted after the Great Depression between 1933 and 1936. This created the idea of redlining that we know today. So you can see from my graph, A A-graded neighborhoods are pristine. So how Roosevelt designed these, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, he would separate neighborhoods into A, B, C, and D grades. A grades automatically receive a loan to buy a home. B grades are up there, not as good as A grades, but definitely good. C grades are questionable, but then D grades were non-negotiable. And many of the families that were in D-graded areas were primarily minorities and African Americans. And another reason why we got here is the importance of the lack of affordable housing. As our country continues to grow, the need for housing, the prices of housing is increasing. So in the western part of the country, such as Seattle, Portland, a lot of the California cities, housing is increasing at an uncontrollable rate. In Portland, for example, vouchers are being sent to Portland. Vouchers are being sent across the state. However, these vouchers don't necessarily need to be used by the landlords themselves. So within this, in Portland receives 100% of the vouchers. They only accept 40% of those vouchers, and then 60% of those vouchers get sent back. So housing is constantly increasing. And then laws that favor the landlord. So for example, in Virginia, we have a habitability law, and this varies by state. Virginia and Alabama are two of the top states in the country that have this habitability law. And the habitability law basically states that tenants, for whatever reason, if they have, per se, cockroaches, or if they have a leaky roof, that is not a justification for them to not pay their rent. If they had things in their household that were unwanted or that were unnecessary that needed to be fixed, and the landlord would not fix them, they would have to go to the court themselves and file their own court order, rather than the landlord who gives them an eviction notice because they didn't pay their rent because there were cockroaches or there was a leaky ceiling. That landlord, it holds the power within that court system. So once they go to court, all the favors go in favor of the landlord. In Richmond, eviction rates have increased over 6% within the last 14 years. Relating back to Roosevelt's New Deal, this is the city of Richmond and how it was divided between grade A neighborhoods, grade B neighborhoods, grade C neighborhoods, and grade D neighborhoods. You can see University of Richmond is actually over here, and VCU area, Broad Street, Cary Street is all down here. So what did I find during my intake calls? Well, the helpline, over the last 10 weeks, we contacted over 70 families across the state of Virginia. 33 of those families resided in Richmond, Virginia. So I divided my call intakes into gender and demographics, and then also location and demographics. So I'm going to go into gender and demographics right here. So of those 33 individuals or 33 families that I contacted, 20 of them were African American females. 4 of them were white females. There was 1 Hispanic female, and then there was 1 Native Indian female that contacted me, and 6 African American males. You can see that African American females in single family households takes presidency, and 60% of the calls that I took were predominantly African American females. And this up here is actually a statement that I had taken from one of the calls. This is probably the most noticeably crazy statement that I had. This was actually an African American female in the city of Richmond. And so her initial noise complaint was for loud music. The second one was for the kids being too loud. And then the third one, she was actually told that she was heavy footed, and the manager said she needs to be more mindful when she walks. Now going into location and demographics. So you can see U of R is right here, and a little over half of the intakes that I took were in the D5 region of Richmond. This includes the Shockoe Bottom areas right here, and this includes all of these districts. And up here, a lot of these dots that you see go off the map, so they do expand outwards, but I try to condense them as much as possible. But yeah, you can see that primarily all of the calls that I took were in this D5 district region. And then right here, this is another statement that I had. Many of the callers that I did take often had to choose between either life or paying their rent. And many of those individuals had to sacrifice paying their rent to pay for their medications or when they're sick, they had to take time off work and because they were injured or for whatever reason. So Sue, I anonymized the names, but Sue was sick and she missed work, and then her husband was sick, he missed work. They fell behind on rent. And the landlord actually came by drunk and gave a handwritten notice that they had 30 days to leave. She said that she would give them the money, and he said he didn't care, he just wanted them out. This is very similar to many of the individuals who I have taken. So from this, knowing that Richmond is a live city for evictions, what are some possible solutions? So Matthew Desmond, in his book Evicted, if you have read it, he suggests some various different kinds of solutions that we could do. He is saying that public housing vouchers are not the problem. They're not the problem. When I refer back to what I said about Portland, it's that there's not enough public housing vouchers. And like I said, these vouchers are optional for the landlords and not guaranteed for the tenants. And there's also rules that go behind these vouchers. These vouchers, when given to people who are interested, they usually have 30 days to find a home. If they don't find a home within those 30 days, those vouchers get automatically sent back. Again, life happens, things happen, and not very many individuals or companies or apartments or homes take these vouchers. So it's extremely hard for individuals to find good housing that is in a good neighborhood and that also accepts these vouchers. Also, Matthew Desmond suggested that we reform the mortgage interest deduction for new homeowners. So for those who don't know, people who are ready to buy a home, homeowners get a lot more advantages than people who are renting. So for example, the mortgage interest deduction is currently set for $1 million. So individuals who are looking to buy a home, they have a $1 million wiggle room to fix their home, to adjust their home to however they want. If we divide this in half and only give them $500,000 instead of the $1 million, and redirect those savings to affordable housing programs, this indeed would actually only affect 5% of the mortgages across the nation and free up $87 billion over the course of 10 years. And this is a quote from Matthew Desmond. He says that eviction pushes people into worse housing and into worse neighborhoods. We can't fix poverty in America without fixing housing. And what he means by this is when tenants receive their eviction notice and they are taken to court, that statement or it stays on their record for up to 7 years, stays on their credit for up to 7 years that they got evicted. And again, not very many people want to take individuals who have bad credit or who have a mark on their credit for whatever reason. So it just is a continual downward spiral from there. And it's really hard. It's really easy to get into the trap of being evicted. Many of my clients were given the choice of whether they wanted to choose life or choose their rent. And actually 42% of the income's household, this is recent news from the CPI index from the nation, 42% of individuals spend their income on housing. And again, life happens. So what was the most challenging part of my internship? Going back to my call intakes, limiting myself to only 3 call attempts. I found it hard to call somebody and them not pick up. Either they were putting the kids to bed, or they were just getting off work, or they were cooking dinner. I didn't want that to be an excuse as to why we couldn't give them help or we couldn't give them the assistance that they needed. So oftentimes, I was at fault. Oftentimes, I would call them maybe 5 times just to make sure, and leave voicemails, of course. And sometimes, and I do call, when I did make my calls, I would call anonymously. So oftentimes some people wouldn't pick up because it's an anonymous caller. So 1 out of those 3 calls was missed because of an anonymized call, because they thought I was a call collector or whatever. So limiting myself to only 3 call attempts was really difficult for me. And then moving on after those 3 unsuccessful call attempts was even more so hard, because once the individuals speak to me, they don't speak to anybody else. They go straight from the voicemail to me to the attorney. And if they did have 3 unsuccessful call attempts, they would have to call the hotline all over again, and we would have to make a whole new case profile for them. And sometimes people just don't have the time. And being patient was definitely a key factor, and being one of my most challenges. A lot of these individuals who I did contact, a lot of them just wanted their voices heard. And sometimes I would even put it on speaker and literally just have the phone sit in front of me and just listen to them. I had one individual speak to me for, I kid you not, 20 minutes straight, just straight talking. And that took a lot of patience on my end. For one, because I want to get to the next caller, I want to be able to help more people, but at the same time, I want to recognize that their needs and in this moment, what they wanted is their voice to be heard. And a lot of these individuals don't have their voices heard. So yeah, these are the top 3 things that were very difficult for me, and I learned a lot about myself from those. And then for my last slide, I included 3 more statements that I have from individuals who I've called. I think it's really important that I was a part of the Eviction Helpline, and I was a part of the piece that was in contact with these evicted residents. I think their voices need to be heard, and I think it's important that we use these voices to advocate for rights across the nation, regardless of the state. Did you guys have any questions for me? Yeah.
It sounds like you did some really powerful work with compassionate listening. How did you practice self-care when it sounds like you were in some pretty ongoing intense situations? How did you replenish yourself when you were giving so much?
Yeah. I will admit it did take a lot out of me, especially because I am a student athlete. Some of my teammates are here today, and we would practice nonstop every day. And then after that, having these conversations with these individuals, it was draining. But meditating and writing, I do like to journal, so I journal frequently if I feel that my mind is just getting out of control. I feel I have a lot of emotions. I have a lot of things on my mind because stuff like this, it keeps me up at night. I remember the first intake that I took. She was in Woodbridge, Virginia, and I shed a tear when she couldn't find housing. And she couldn't find housing simply because she had dogs. She was single. She had 3 dogs, not just one. She had 3 dogs. She was a single mother of 2 kids. One was autistic. And she had that eviction notice on her credit. So not very many people wanted to, for one, accept the eviction notice, and then for 2, accept not just 1, but 3 dogs. So it was extremely, extremely hard, and it kept me up at night for a good 3 weeks. But I think it's important to remember to put your trust and faith in God, and God played a big factor. I don't know if many of you are religious, but and so forgive me for saying this, but God did play a big factor in this, in guiding me through this.